John Hutchinson is a self-taught theoretical physicist who has discovered the key to the Bermuda Triangle phenomenon, among other things. He has been a speaker on Discovery Channel documentaries, not that that means anything, because they produce propaganda as well. John Hutchinson collects old surplus Navy equipment. He hooks it up and does his own experiments with it, and he's compiled quite an impressive collection. While experimenting with Tesla coils tuned to ultra-high frequencies and pointing them at different objects, he was able to make them fly straight off the ground and pull metal apart like rubber spaghetti by fine-tuning the frequencies. All of the effects that John has discovered have already been known to our military since the 1930s, and I will point out one experiment in particular that was leaked accidentally. The Philadelphia experiment. There were many experiments like it done by the military, and all of them still classified as of the date of this video. During this one experiment, they placed 3 large Tesla coils on a destroyer, one on the bow, one on the stern, and one on the mast of the ship. They ran a large battery of tests, experimenting with different frequency ranges and recording their results. They found that in certain frequencies the boat would lose weight. It would seem to rise up out of the water. So they did a test and tried it with men aboard. When they stopped to check the status of the crew, many of the men were motion sick and vomiting, and had bloodshot eyes and bleeding. And on the lower decks they found dead crew members. Some of them had their bodies melted inside the wall, literally fused inside the metal hull of the ship. Many were hemorrhaging from organs and had bloodshot eyes from ruptured blood vessels, and also had bruising on their bodies from internal bleeding due to ruptured blood vessels. Some people, including whoever censors Wikipedia, will try to argue that the Philadelphia experiments, as I am talking about, didn't happen. They refer to a different Philadelphia experiment, obviously a different one than the real one that we all know about. I've also seen many attempts to discredit John Hutchinson and his experiments, and I want to point out that John's experiments cannot be discredited, while his own interpretations of the phenomenon can, because he misunderstands a lot of things. Basically, this so-called Hutchinson effect and the Philadelphia experiment were experiments which discovered something called hyperatomic resonance, which causes diamagnetism. Quantum mechanics tells us that everything in the universe is a wave, and thus has its own frequency. Well, let's think about the table that your computer monitor sits on for 1 second. Is that a wave? Well, actually, it is. The table, the board that has a frequency, usually a couple different frequencies. The more complex the geometry of the object, the more frequencies needed to describe the object. We'll start with a simple object, like a long flat board, and we'll compare it with a really, really long flat board. The man holding the longer flat board will shake his much slower than the man with the shorter one. This is because the object's frequency along a particular axis, say the one to the length, going along the length of the board, is inversely proportional to the length of the board itself. So the longer the board, the lower the frequency. The shorter the board, which it can effectively be thought of as a wavelength itself, the higher the frequency. Small objects require a much higher frequency than you could shake it at, so you could use a motor or a guitar string to vibrate them. I suggest you study everything you can on waves. I can't go over everything in this video because I'm going to have to show how they describe all these different effects. So I want you to read up on waves so you can understand how the wavelength is related to the frequency, and most importantly, so you will understand resonance and bass frequency, not BASS, B-A-S-E, bass frequency, and harmonics. Harmonics, like first, second, third, they go all the way up in music anyway until it gets too high for you to hear. Harmonics explains why a guitar's 12th fret is always at the exact halfway point between the bridge and the neck. You divide a wave in half and go up an octave, and multiply by 2 to go down an octave. Waves and resonance can be effectively and incredibly powerful. Take, for example, the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, or Tesla's earthquake machine. At one point in his career, when Tesla was poor like me, he lived in an apartment in a tall building, and he put together an 8-watt motor which vibrated a 15-pound weight back and forth at a tunable frequency. He measured the height of the building and calculated the approximate frequency of the building itself, and played around with the motor until he tuned into that frequency. The entire building began to rock back and forth with the rhythm of the 15-pound weight due to he produced a standing wave. This is the same thing that brought down the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. You can read up more on this if you want. Basically, the owner of the building called the fire department and directed them to the strange man's room, where they found Tesla with his machine on the floor, which they promptly smashed to pieces in a panicked effort to stop the building from collapsing. They didn't know that inversing the machine would dampen the standing wave faster than actually smashing it, but luckily the building was a steel-framed building, heavily redundant structure, and did not collapse. Tesla's so-called earthquake machine was simply harmonizing with the wavelength of the entire building, producing a standing wave. In the strongman competitions, there are men who can pull trains weighing 100 tons or more. Since force equals mass times acceleration, and the masses of a locomotive is huge, the acceleration will be small, but acceleration is a change in velocity, so although it's small, it still changes the velocity of the train, beginning to speed it up and increase its velocity by little tiny bits. So after a while, you can actually get the train moving by pulling it a lot. And that type of motion is a linear motion, but you can apply the same exact thing to a heavy, tall building, which you put wave motion into. And this is this type of resonance. The type of resonance which causes the Hutchinson effect and related effects can be explained by looking at how the frequencies compare to the molecular and atomic structure of the material itself. This phenomenon is only observed while using ultra-high frequency and incredibly high frequency Tesla waves. Why? Because they correspond to the frequency of the distance in the atoms in the structure. The distance between the atoms in a structure is equal to the wavelength, which will resonate that structure. Once you find the resonant frequency with the Tesla waves, you have effectively trapped and aligned the atoms. You can now tune the frequency a tiny bit higher, causing diamagnetism by squeezing the atoms together, restricting the electron orbits, which causes a north pole and a south pole, artificially induced diamagnetism, which causes levitation. If you lower the frequency, it pulls the atoms apart a tiny bit, which causes a phase change of matter, where a solid starts behaving like a liquid due to these strong electromagnetic forces resonating within it. This is the force that pulls aluminum bars apart and turns them into rubber spaghetti. This is the force that levitates 70-pound cannonballs. It's electromagnetic force, not a new force, nothing new. it would be scientifically possible to create a craft that could float around using this type of artificially induced diamagnetism, only it would need to be extremely lightweight and of perfect crystalline structure. Nano-engineered quasi-crystals would do the trick. However, it cannot be used as a propulsion technology unless you can show how it doesn't violate conservation of momentum. So ion wind would probably be the best bet here, and I'm almost positive that this is the technology used in the rod-shaped UFOs, and I also don't see why it wouldn't be used in the sport models to give it a little extra oomph in addition to the superfluid centrifuge accelerator ring. So, there you have it. I hope I explained a lot of these phenomenon for people.
I have a contact in Russia named Elaine, and in roughly 1999, he sent me a URL about this Russian scientist and a flying platform. And I went and looked at it. This is the cover off of the book, which I managed to get from Russia, so all in Russian. Gravitikov discovered something called a cavity structural effect, and it's basically what we're talking about with tubes. And the frequencies that cancel themselves. Oh, by the way, Gravitikov says the two most common materials in this world are cellulose, because it doesn't decay, and chitin. Chitin is spelled C-H-I-T-I-N. That's what all insects are made out of. Chitin. It's the shells, the body, beetles, roaches, butterflies, everything's made out of chitin, and it doesn't dissolve and it doesn't die. So all the dust in your house, that's billion-year-old bugs that are still grumbled and falling. But what's interesting about chitin is dielectric. The Casimir plates are dielectric. They repel electricity. These nanostructure arrays, when you look at them under a microscope, this is what they look like. This is excreted by the bug in growing its tissues, you know, the chitin. That's what it looks like as you go significantly greater magnifications. That's what you see, finer and finer. Look like it's machined. It's almost perfect. Go to the next one, please. This is even a finer magnification, and these are those little resonating cavities that appear to pick up the lower you go, the higher frequencies, like a straw with a certain frequency, like organ pipes. As the organ pipes change in length, the frequency goes up. So the deeper you go into mass with these resonating structures, eventually you're going to hit Cater's frequency below infrared terahertz, and you would be able to cancel gravity. So that's what all this is leading to. The original experiment, he's looking at a microscope. This one particular bug, he won't tell us if it's a beetle. A beetle or a butterfly or some kind of a wasp. He won't tell the genus of the insect. But he claims he was looking at one little piece of it, a concave, concave. It looks like a satellite dish. And he's looking at that under a microscope. It's a chitin plate, chitin, C-H-I-T-I-N. He's looking at it under a microscope, looking at this extremely precise nanostructure array. Well, this is electron microscope. But in this one, he's looking at these star shapes all on these concave plates. And he happened to take a pair of tweezers, and he had another one like this, and he dragged it across, and it jumped out of the tweezers and floated up in the air and fell off to the side. So he thought, I've been working too long. So he takes it out from under the microscope. He does it again, and it floats up out of the air and floats back down. So he goes out and kills a bunch of these bugs and rips off their wings. And he glues them all to this board, like a grid, 10 by 10, something like that. And he sets it where all the cups are facing up. He drops an ink pen on it, and the ink pen floats in the air. He drops a tack on it, and the tack floats in the air. He turns the board upside down, and the board floats in the air. It's like, whoa. And it all sounds like BS, but remember, fluctuations, 0-point energy, and training, the whole bit. Okay, He said the detail broke loose from my tweezers. It hung suspended in the air, then it fell back. He ties these panels together and he makes these panel blocks made out of cotton. Okay, so they're basically little repelling blocks. Okay, air ray levitation of pin, tack, and other objects. He says, I'm not naming the class to which this insect belongs. It seems on the verge of extinction. He's a big tree hugger. I have no problem with tree huggers, but you know, you got to protect as much as you can. And he doesn't want to give the name of this because he thinks if this gets out to the world, they'll come in and take every bug they can. I wrote him a letter and I said, look, we don't care about the name of the bug. Just send us a couple of samples. If we can duplicate the effect, prove it's not electrostatic, it's not electromagnetic, we can make artificial, just you know, analyze it with an acoustic microscope, a scanning microscope, get the specific dimension. Is it hexagonal, you know, tetragon, what? And make it into an array. What is the structure, the size? Is it on angstroms, micrometers, what? And just run off sheets of this stuff. So if you made a pair of coveralls with this stuff, you'd float in the air like a big balloon. So, oh, it gets better. So,
Correlated Magnetics Research presents Programmable Magnets. Correlated magnetic structures are programmed by imparting onto the substrate coded patterns of magnetic field sources that determine their field and force properties. Programmed correlated magnetic structures respond to each other based on the attract, repel, or cancellation forces coded into their surfaces and the spatial proximity of the structures themselves. Correlated Magnetics Research has produced and demonstrated the first non-contact attachment device utilizing a pair of permanent magnets. With multi-level correlated magnets, we have programmed individual magnets to exhibit both attract and repel forces simultaneously. Since codes can be devised to control both field strength and engagement distance, we can create regions on the magnet surface that exhibit a long throw attract force and other regions that exhibit a short throw repel force. This device was created to illustrate this principle. Here we see the multi-level correlated magnets mounted in a hinged fixture, much like a cabinet door. When the correlated pair approach each other, the attract force engages and pulls the magnets together. Before they make contact, however, the stiff repel force is encountered and the magnets move away. The opposing forces are damped out in short order, and an equilibrium position is achieved. The magnets are trapped between balanced forces of attract and repel. So how do we accomplish this? Here is a typical force versus distance comparison where the attractive force for a magnet pair is measured and recorded as the magnets separate. Codes can be devised to control field strength and engagement distance, as well as the behavior like the non-contact attachment you just saw. As the code density increases, the peak attractive force increases, and the engagement distance is reduced. By exploiting the shape of the engagement curves, and by programming one behavior to attract while its counterpart repels, we can prescribe the distance at which equilibrium is reached, and the strength of the forces on each side of the transition point. Through correlated magnetics, we can balance the opposing forces to trap coated magnets at equilibrium position, effectively attaching component structures without contact. Doors, cabinets, gates, and other enclosures can lock without damage or contact wear. Automated mechanisms can grapple items without touching them. Passive stability and vibration damping for optical tables and other devices are enabled. Even non-contact docking of modular space vehicles is on the horizon.
So a man named Grebennikov from Russia. Grebennikov was kind of a non-conventional scientist. He was an entomologist, did a lot of work with bugs, entomology. And his favorite thing was to go out into the steppes of Russia and into the various outer hinterlands and camp out in the summers and study his favorite subject. And on one of these expeditions, he started seeing some weird effects. This is all explained in great detail on the AchilleNet site if you type in Grebennikov and his flying box or gravity platform. But anyhow, the result of this was to show that he found a certain bug that didn't fly, it levitated. And this was, he'd put this bug into a little vial or something, and he saw this vial jumping up off the lab table, jumping up and down. And of course this is patently impossible based on any type of normal physics. So he got into this, and he found out that the bug wings themselves we're creating an anti-gravity phenomena under certain conditions. And of course what we have here, if you analyze, I think I found the bug, actually a beetle. And if you analyze this bug structure, you see a hexagonal pyramid structure array throughout the entire bottom wing of this bug. Turns out that beetles have two wings. The top wing is called a wing cover, and what the beetle does is it lifts this wing cover up and then it flips out its lower wings or inner wings. Now the bug cover protects the inner wings, but when it gets excited or something, it flips these other wings out and it flaps these other wings, and the inner wings flap a little, and this beetle goes gyrating around. They can't fly very good, but they sure levitate great, I guess. And anyway, he took a whole bunch of these bug wings and he glued them to like a Venetia blind structure, and he put it into a little platform he built. So they were all, these bug wings were all covered in here. And he used I theorized he used the wing covers as well as the inner wing itself. There's also a kind of a handlebar on this thing with some controls. You can see the thing a little better here in detail. The controls, I think, had to be manipulated continuously and probably vibrated to create the same action that the bug was doing. There was also down at the base some kind of a lever, which I suspect controlled the amount of lift he was getting out of this thing. Anyway, Grebennikov claimed that he could fly this thing, or levitate it, and it would go around at almost 1,000 miles an hour. Now you ask, how can that happen? Well, he said that there was an energy field that built up around this thing due to this gravity field building up in the platform. And by this thing building up, it built out a force field that basically surrounded him and protected him from the local environment. So even though he was flying at 1,000 miles an hour, you could go you know, you could be wearing your Sunday best suit and not get it flutter a bit at 1,000 miles an hour. I'm not sure I'd want to stand on something going 1,000 miles an hour that's 2 feet square. But this picture here shows him sitting on the ground. And these pictures are much better if you get on the KeelyNet site. This is the platform with him on it about 3 to 6 feet above the ground, because here's the shadow here down below. Now you could say this is all faked, but if you get into the other things he did with shape, they almost mirror the stuff that I discovered. And it proves, I guess, that, you know, there's either 2 crazy people in the world or there's 2 people that have found the same discoveries. So I think that this is a valid phenomenon, and I'll show you why. Next slide is a micrograph that I took of a beetle inner wing. This is at 100x. If you look closely at this thing, you can see rows of bumps all along the bottom of this wing. Each row is staggered from the next row next to it. And this is all over the surface of the bottom of the wing. Now, I don't know of any aerodynamic surface that has bumps all over the bottom to help it fly better. If you blow this up to 430x, you can start to see some of this microstructure of the cells that form where these bumps are. The next slide, at 970x, you start to see what these bumps that stick up are. They're hairs, look like hairs or fibers that grow out of the center of these hexagonal cells. And of course, this harkens back to my basic shape power discovery, is that each one of these, because of their shape going down to a point, is creating a magnetic field. And remember, a magnetic field is a rotating piece of vortex in the ether.